Good evening, everyone. I'm Clay, joined by Miss E Train, and welcome to Saturday Night Live and Rambling. Glad to have you. We just showed you our newest technological advance, the Peppers Cam, and there he is, the illustrious Mr. Ian Runkle. How you doing, Edie?
Hey, doing all right. Sorry I'm a little late here, but it's
No, you're
You're not
good.
late at all. We just got started.
oh excellent. How are you guys?
If I was any finer, I'd be twins.
I love that.
Doing well, Ian. How are you?
Oh, it's an all right day. Beautiful day outside, so can't complain.
We
Well,
can't
I wish we
exactly say that.
could say the same. There's been a tropical depression where we are for the
Ooh,
past day and a
that's
half, and so if power goes out, here's your warning. We
fair
may
enough.
flip off for some reason.
If it does, we will arrange a. I was going to say a rain check, but that might be in poor taste given the circumstances.
But rather apropos.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's oh, I mean out here it's sunny. The smoke has gone away because it was very smoky out here for a bit. So that's a good place to be. It's actually okay to go outside again.
Now, was that due to
That's
the
good.
wildfires?
Yeah, they're throwing uh, a ton of smoke up into the air, and unfortunately, a lot of people have been displaced from their homes and so forth. So
Oh gosh.
um, it's um, it's rough, but hopefully that clears up. We keep hoping for some actual rain.
Yeah. Normally, we have the lovely state of California to provide it kind of as a nightlife. I can't even talk. Ian, you got me all rustled here.
It's all good.
We have the lovely state of California to use as a nightlight with all the wildfires burning.
Oh,
They're kind of our
jeez.
national guidelight. They years ago implemented a forest management practice where you couldn't clear out the underbrush
Which, of
or do
course,
controlled burns. So now
that
when
sounds
there's
like
a
a
forest
recipe
fire,
for. Sorry, go
yeah,
on.
now when there's a forest fire, it burns hot and fast,
Yeah.
and they can't control it. So,
Ah,
glad
government
glad to have
always
you.
is there to help.
Where's every time I hear that, the image immediately pops into my head of Reagan saying, government isn't the solution, it's the problem.
In a lot of circumstances, or they're
And
pretending to be the solution while actually doing not a whole. Oh, hey, we've got a segue here. It's because today we're talking about Madoff, aren't we?
Bernie Madoff, the well-known, the much-loved.
Hey Clay, I've got
Um,
to interrupt you. You
Sure.
forgot to turn your lights on.
Oh, all this technologically advanced stuff. I'm I'm just like I want to bash Madoff.
oh well, yeah. I don't think there's a whole lot of people in his corner at this point.
No, well, he's passed, but yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, normally it's a thing where in somebody's passing, everybody wants to speak well of. Not a lot of people lining up for that for him. Um,
Definitely not.
No, he was an interesting dude, kind of a tragic what's the Shakespearean tragedy kind of character where
I can,
seemingly lives a glorious life and then dies a embarrassing death.
yeah, well,
Um,
and takes a bunch of people down with him, and just everything falls
yeah,
apart. Um,
yeah. But before we get into that, I just want to also introduce our two mods for tonight, Viking Wolf and Miss Sandra Ramirez. We are very pleased to have y'all and appreciate y'all keeping things running smoothly for us. We've had both mod for us in the past, and they do a great job. So very, very thankful y'all are here tonight. along with
And
everybody
to-
else.
And to segue, that was a nice segue, by the way, Clay. I wanted to thank Ian personally for everything that you have done and did regarding Secret. It means a lot to me, and I know the entire community that you were there to represent us. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you, but I mean, I wasn't even the one doing the heaviest lifting. I really think we owe thanks to Paul, who's been tremendous rock. Just a lot of stuff that needed to be taken care of that is difficult to take care of, and he stepped up to do it in very difficult circumstances, difficult times, and I think that he took care of a lot of the things that were most important to Secret. So that I will be forever grateful for that, because we all love Secret. She was an absolute pillar, and yeah, it's tough scenarios, but and it's difficult times, but I mean, I think everybody sort of steps up to do what they can in these circumstances, and he had to carry more than anyone else, I think. So I want to thank him.
He had way more on his plate than any of us, for sure.
Yeah.
And he did an amazing job.
Yeah, I think he was glad to sort of be done with the heavy lifting aspects, but he carried an absolute burden that nobody else could, and and he just stepped up and took care of all sorts of things. So that I'm tremendously grateful for that. So,
well, and we're tremendously grateful for your efforts. Flying from Edmonton to Glasgow is no easy trick. You did it just to attend the funeral. And
yeah, and my flight experiences they never go well.
It's like airlines have forgotten how to fly.
Oh yeah, it's once upon a time airlines were sort of a lot more comfortable, and people were like, "Yay, I'm going flying." Now it's like, "Oh God." You want to get to somewhere, but you dread having to take the trip. So my back is still not happy with me. It's you fly in a tiny little tin can, and it's not my favorite thing. But it was important to be there, and it was a wonderful send off. So I think it's exactly what she would have wanted. So. And that's, again, all Paul's doing.
Yeah, that made me think of something here, trying to get it up. Talk about the difference in flying.
Oh, yeah. Nowadays, they'll give you a little wooden knife. It was literally like wooden knives that were just...
won't cut anything, and you got some dried up old sandwich, or... like a Swanson dinner.
We had options between chicken and pasta. And on the way there, I had the chicken, and I figured that was a mistake. And on the way back, I had the pasta, and it turned out that was a mistake. It was like, how are both of these options worse than the other option?
And part of the worst thing for me is getting my fat ass in some of those dinky little seats with my knees pressed up against the back of the chair in front of me.
My wife is taller than I am. I find those seats to be uncomfortably cramped. She just really doesn't enjoy them at all. And, what can you do? There's not a whole lot you can actually, do about it, other than maybe get up.
There's not really a whole lot of...
Get up and walk to the bathroom and back, and just to try to stretch out and, untangle yourself. But, yeah.
Yeah, Clay's 6'3". Yeah, Clay's 6'3", so it's tough for him.
I'm not a petite person.
It's like the only time when you're like, man, I wish I was 5'2".
And the worst thing is when I get in my seat and then you see another big old fat ass come and plop down right next to me. And we're just sitting there looking at each other going, could it be any more perfect?
At one point I booked late and I got stuck in the middle seat. And these two very, very large people. And I mean, large people have a right to fly as well, but it still makes things a little difficult for the person next to them. But on my left and on my right, and they were clearly a couple, so they're sort of leaning in to talk to each other. And I was like, oh. So the one of the flight attendants comes by and says, can I talk to you for a second? And I'm like, sure. And I have to sort of, the guy who's on the aisle seat wouldn't get up. Like, normally you get up to let somebody out because there's no room. So I had to like physically squeeze past this guy. And the flight attendant sort of beckons me a little down the aisle, and she's like, we had a seat open up front, and we weren't really going to do anything, but then we noticed, how cramped in you are. Would you like to move? And I was like, oh, God's yes. So they're like, okay, grab whatever you need to grab. And so I grabbed my stuff and they moved me. It wasn't like moving up a class or anything, but it was to a window seat that was way up front. And I was just like, oh my God, thank you. I was so happy because they were well into encroaching on my seat and leaning in to talk to each other the whole time. And I was just like, oh, this is gonna be a rough flight. And it was, like a 5-hour flight. So I was not pleased.
You don't have to beg me twice.
Yeah, it was just, I don't like, there's a thing couples do where they take the window in the aisle and then they leave, and then they hope no one's going to book the middle seat. And it's like, well, we're going to book the middle seat because where else are you going to go? And then sometimes the couple is like, well, you can take whatever's, they'll try to say, okay, well, you can take the aisle or you can take the window. And I mean, that's always better than the middle, but it's still like, just book the seats next to each other if you want to be next to each other. And if you need that extra space, just book that middle seat as well. But nope, I was just cramped in there. It was not a fun time.
Yeah, my worst flying experience is I've got seated on a New York to Madrid flight with a woman and a little baby. And the change in pressure and all of that, I guess,
hard
got
on
the baby.
kids.
Yeah, started crying and screaming and just wouldn't stop for hours. He finally passed out for, I don't know, 45 minutes.
It's really hard on kids.
Their ears, the pressure just really messes with them.
And then they don't understand like how you can, what you could do to clear that. You can't like explain to them that it's going to pass. You can't, there's nothing that can be done. They just sort of, go through and suffer through it. So, I always just bring earplugs, and I bring pretty good ones. These things actually, so I went and bought some better monitors, like better in-ear sort of monitors for this kind of thing. And I brought them on the flight, and I got to say they were a game changer. Because when I sat down and was watching a movie because these things were really good at excluding noise. And I was able to watch the movie, and it felt like I was just in the movie and not on a plane. It was fantastic. So
that's really cool. I do want to say I flew with both of my children when they were infants, and they were tiny, but what I did was just nurse them, and that helped them swallow and open up their ears, and neither one of them cried the entire time.
I mean, some people might feel uncomfortable or awkward, and you never know who's next to you on a flight. Like the person next to you might decide to start something over that, because sometimes people get upset by that.
A blanket,
Yeah, or they might be a creep is the other thing.
True.
And then they're taking too much interest, and you're like, no, don't like that.
True.
So I mean, it's just hard. flights aren't fun for everybody, but they get even less fun when you're dealing with all this stuff. So
sometimes the options are limited. You just have to sit there and go, it's only for a few hours.
yeah,
and,
well,
it'll get me where I need to go.
because I was booking at sort of the last minute, my options were either like direct flights at ridiculous prices because on one flight the only seats that were available was like a seat in business class, and I'm like, okay, that would be great to fly business class, but I really don't want to spend like $7,000-8,000 to go for 3 days or 2 days. Whereas or the other option was like a whole lot of hops. So it was actually flying back was Glasgow to London, London to Montreal, Montreal to Calgary, Calgary to Edmonton. So 4 flights, and at 3 of them, I had to get security screening. So
Oh, geez.
it was like, got to leave each time, got to get re-screened, got to, and I was just like, oh God, just kill me. I'm so done with this. And yeah, it was not a fun sort of moment. Especially, thankfully, I didn't have to run for any of my connections, which is often a thing I have to do. One flight left late, and so it was going to be a tough connection. And what is it? But quite thankfully, the gate that I was going to was like literally just across the hallway. So I was like, I'm going to have to run. I've got like 2 minutes to get to my next. Oh, it's right here. Okay, cool. So
That's convenient.
Well, it really, saved me from a whole lot of hassle. So, yeah.
Well, I know I'm getting, old or absent-minded professor kind of thing, because last time I flew, I was going to a conference, and I went through the security screening and set off the metal detector. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, it's my belt. So I was trying to pull off my belt, went through a second time, still went off. And I was like checking my pockets. All of a sudden it hit me. I've got 2 titanium knees, a plate in my ankle and in my back. I'm a walking junkyard of titanium.
Titanium shouldn't set it off, though.
Do what?
Titanium shouldn't set it off, though.
Yeah, metal. Any dense mass metal.
Or even the screws.
It should only be magnetic metal. So I don't know. It should only be magnetic. I've got the thing that I keep forgetting that sets it off is my belt with a great big belt buckle.
Oh, nice. That's pretty.
This I made myself, the leather. The buckle I bought, and then I made a belt to go with the buckle. So
it's beautiful.
That was a big project. I need to make another one, because my original thought was I will make this thing and donate it to sort of a charitable thing. And then after I made it, I was like, no, I'm keeping this one.
That's how it works, right?
I love this one too much. I can't. So yeah, it's that one I ended up keeping. So yeah.
I don't blame you.
But yeah, no, it's I mean, you make it through the flights. That's about all you can do there, and you just sort of go through it. But
let's talk about some Madoff.
Bernie
yes,
Madoff.
He is a fun character.
He is to me an interesting, a fascinating character. And doing some of the research or whatever for this, there were some things that I didn't know that I thought were interesting. And this kind of continues our series in financial failures, looking at some big failures and trying to see if there are some consistencies or some things that can be learned in terms of what to look out for, what to understand. And Bernie Madoff, just to remind everybody, was the brain behind the world's largest Ponzi scheme. I feel like as an American, I need to tip my hat to Social Security. So maybe I should say the world's largest private Ponzi scheme. But
Hey, now it's the only thing that causes a Ponzi scheme to fail is that you stop getting new people. But
Yeah.
if you're wondering why population always has to go up, that's
there you go.
That's a big part of the reason. Because if population goes down, suddenly everything goes very badly, very fast. Yeah.
And Social Security is a good example of it, because the Social Security Administration just came out and lowered their estimate of when the Social Security is going bankrupt. Instead of 34, it's now 33.
Oh, lovely.
What most people don't realize is when it started, there were 200 people paying in for each recipient. And that number has dropped to 2 to 1 and is going to approach 1 to 1 in another few years. So if I retire and start collecting Social Security and get, I don't know, let's say $3,000 a month, well,
that means $3,000 a month had to come from somebody else.
Yeah, plus administrative cost, etc.
Oh, I mean, it would be cheaper to just get assigned somebody and pay them, because the administrative costs end up getting. This is one of my rants about a lot of how we administer like welfare programs and so forth, because we set up these very complicated admissibility ratings and so forth. And for all of that, you need to have people who are there figuring all this out and checking it. Like food stamps are a relatively successful program, but still have various problems in the sense of like, you got to actually send investigators to stores to be like, can you buy liquor with this? And crack down on that. So you end up with these tremendous sunk costs of just paying people just to be part of the administration of all this.
Yeah, I always tell my students that I have a vested interest in them graduating and getting a good job, because I want them all going out there and paying outrageous taxes, because I want my Social Security. They're screwed, but I want mine. So I'm always telling them, go pay outrageous taxes.
Well, at this point, nuclear war might be the financially sensible maneuver. It's just like, well, that'll solve our
our problems. Yeah, everything just goes away in a heartbeat. And I remember in school doing the nuclear bomb alerts, where you would have to get out of your desk and crawl under your desk as if that was really going to protect you.
I think that the idea is really that it was going to protect you from like, the ceiling collapsing or glass flying. But I think it's also just, if everyone is under their desk, then what aren't they doing? Running around. Right. And, if you can get everybody to climb under a desk, it's like, okay, well, now you're sitting there being quiet. And
that's a fair.
And then cynically, maybe the important people can escape.
But I'm like, if there's a nuclear explosion going off a few miles away, I want to be at the window and watch it. Spend my last few seconds in awe and wonder.
Depends how far away it is, because there's a point where you might live, but you don't necessarily want the flying glass. So you'd hate to be the only person who was injured just because you were standing next to the window watching.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to live most places where they are a major tier 1 target. Like right now, we're half a mile from the nation's largest weapons depot across the river.
Yeah, that'll get hit. It's like,
so just
when you pull up those maps and you're like, okay, let's look at like the size of a Russian nuke and where they would drop it. Oh yeah, I'm like right in the kill zone. That's I've got I'm in Edmonton, so there's an air base a distance out, but it's close enough that things would be a problem. So yep, you just sort of get used to it and just go, okay, well, cheers.
Kind of first world problems almost.
Although
it's a good life.
If you do survive one, remember the rule of 7, which is that the radiation you'll get in the first 7 minutes is equivalent to like the radiation you'll get in the first set in the next, or is it like 7 seconds followed by 7 minutes followed by 7 weeks followed by like 70 years?
Something
So
like
it's basically
that,
if you can hold on for a limited and not go out into the fallout for a limited period, you'll actually avoid most of the radiation.
I think for most events, if you can stay insulated for 2 weeks and then come out, the radiation levels would have dropped sufficiently for you to be able to survive. Now, I don't know what you'd eat. Most of the food, groundwater,
you can actually fast for 7 days without too much of a difficult. It's gonna suck, but I'm just trying to pull up the rule of 7 here, just looking it up. But after 7 hours, the radiation is only 10% of the original. And after 7 days, or after 49 hours, so 7 times 7, it's 1%. So if you can hold on for a while, you're probably going to be a lot happier. And the smart thing is, I'm not sort of like the sort of super prepper type, but have some food and water, just because even with this wildfire stuff, right? If you're having to flee, wouldn't it be nicer to be able to flee and know that you're going to eat along the way? That kind of thing. So yeah, and water is really important. And water is easy enough to store.
I don't even think you have to be a complete prepper, but like we live on the coast, it's possible like Katrina came through and took out the roads, took out the electricity. You can't use credit cards without electricity.
Yep. Well, unless you go to one of the very few places that still has the old machine.
Yeah.
I was taking a taxi not long ago, and this was kind of a funny moment. The guy's like, our credit card, is down. I can't take you. And I was like, well, don't you have a backup machine? He's like, I have a backup machine. I don't know how it works. And I said, will you drive me if I can explain to you how it works and run it through? And he's like, okay. So this guy drove me to where I needed to be. It wasn't anything pressing. It was just like going to be a pain in the butt. But when I got there, I was like, so here's how the machine works. You take one of these things, you put it on the thing, you put your card sort of underneath it, and then, it generates a copy. And he's like, why? I'm like, because we didn't always have cell phones to that little cell modem in this thing didn't always exist. It used to be that this was how all of these were done. And he's like, but then how do I know if it went through? I'm like, you don't. You hope. And he's like, so I just have to trust you? I'm like, well, you trusted me this far. He's like, okay. Just like, it is what it is, right? It's just
it worked for decades doing it the old school way. And you didn't have people stealing your credit cards either.
People did steal credit cards all the time,
but not near as much.
Well, and it was a lot harder to steal one in the sense that, if I pulled out my credit card and just held it up and sort of toyed with it on screen, somebody would probably be buying themselves a boat by the end of the. And they would try. My card would be like, nah. It'd be like, No, you should have stolen that from somebody with a little more, financial security. But it would have been like, sorry, nope. But now, I mean, you can do that. You can take somebody's card and run it through online, and not a big deal. Whereas before, you had to actually print out a card, for
Right.
the for that machine, and it had to be a card with like 3D dimensions and so forth. It made it so that you had to have equipment to steal from somebody, even if you had their credit card number, which was a bit of an improvement, I guess.
Yeah, but now with everything digital, if you can go on the dark web and download a lot of people's cards that they don't know are out there.
Yep.
And you've got the card, you've got the expiration date, you've got the 3-digit code. So that's how.
Yeah, the other thing I'll recommend to people is check your credit card statements, because often what'll happen is they'll
Absolutely.
make a small test purchase, and they might make a few small test purchases, and then they'll wait for a bit, and then they'll hammer your card. So if you see like a little purchase at like a gas station that you've never been to, or like, an Uber Eats purchase that is at in a town you've never lived in or never visited to, that might be a sign that somebody is going to start hammering you. And I had my credit card, somebody poached the details from it at one point, and it was a major hassle. But when I look back at it, they started with an Uber Eats purchase, and then went from that Uber Eats purchase to, buying furniture and like airline tickets and all of this stuff. And it was like, okay, you just, you don't really realize how much that's going to affect your life until it is. So.
Yeah, I've had some trash to try to get off my credit reports, and it's a process.
Yeah.
Once it gets on there.
Yep. It's thankfully my bank was pretty chill. They were just like, let's go through your statement. And I was, going through it transaction by transaction. They're like, so is this one you? And I'm like, yeah. And they actually thought it was kind of funny, because they're like, usually people are trying to BS us in these things. And I was like, well, I don't really have a reason to try to BS you. It's just, here's the things that are that I paid for. So they were like, like an AliExpress purchase. And I was like, yeah, no, that was me. I bought something stupid for doing a video on. And they're like, okay. Because apparently normally people are like, no, that's not me, for everything they can. But I was like, yeah, no, I obviously didn't go to a furniture store in Quebec. And they're like, okay, yeah, fair enough. And so.
Yeah, I look at my statements at the end of the month, go line by line, and I'm like, yep, I made a stupid purchase. Yep, I made a stupid purchase. Blazing B.
Well, I mean,
I used to work for MasterCard. Ian is 100% right. Gas stations are a favorite.
Yep. They it's really common.
Easy targets. Yeah.
Yeah.
Easy targets. You said something about using the old-fashioned credit cards, or I carry cash, and that made me kind of think about the Canadian issue. I just saw where one of the Canadian central bank, the deputy governor, I think she was, run a survey online about people's willingness or interest in accepting a Canadian central bank digital currency.
Oh, they keep trying to float that, and I'm not a fan of the idea at all, because at the end of the day, you need to have that fallback capability, right? If power goes out, you still might need to buy something. If there's a disaster, you still might need to buy things.
Yeah.
I have a bag for, like, if I'm out somewhere, like if I'm working in an office or whatever, it's a bag for here is what I have to get home with. And I, if there's a disaster and I have some cash in it. And the reason why is because if you need to take if there's a disaster, and we're getting feedback here off. Yeah, it's just if you need to take a cab or something, like you need to buy something on the way back, and there may be people still trying to sell stuff, even in some sort of disaster. Just being able to give them money is fantastic. And the disaster might just be something like somebody crushed your car into a cube, and it turns out, during a time when your credit cards aren't working, right? Just a combination of two things, right? Somebody steals your card, and so the bank shuts it down, and, your car won't start. Well, what do you do? Well, if you have cash on hand, you can still take a cab or, pay a tow truck driver or any of these things. But not so much if you don't.
Yeah, cash always works. And I read through some of the responses to their survey. It was kind of funny. Some people were calling it surveillance currency.
Yep. And yeah, you can't buy anything without it being tracked somehow.
And apparently the government response to the truck driver protest, scared a lot of people that they didn't want the government to be able to cancel their money on a whim, or if they oppose some government policy.
It should absolutely scare you, even if you even if you're opposed to, the trucker protest and you hate those people. The notion of the government being able to just shut you down financially should be terrifying. That's way too much power for, or just like the bank forgets who you are. And, so yeah.
And there's another thing that I haven't seen a whole lot of people talking about, but which has been in the back of my mind, is that if the government issues a digital currency, they can include or program it with a sunset provision. So, you get paid. Yeah, you can't hoard it. You can't save it. You have to spend it within 2 weeks, a month, whatever the sunset period is.
The rules are, yeah. Yeah, they can decide what you can and can't do with your money. They can say you can't. We could see proposals like you're only allowed to spend X much money per week on alcohol.
Yeah.
And some of these things you're like, oh, well, what's the problem with that? Well, right up until you're the guy who's buying for maybe everybody in your house is saying you make the shopping run, and maybe you live in like a frat house. So there's a lot of people with, who drink, or you decide you are buying the booze for a wedding. And it's like, oh no, you can't buy that much. If you need to buy that much, you should just, hire somebody. And I can tell you the price of serving our own alcohol at our wedding, my wife and I did that, was vastly cheaper than if we, had an open bar through the venue or through anything else. Because, that gets super expensive because.
There's another caveat to that too. I remember when COVID hit and everything was shut down. Liquor stores stayed open
for 2 weeks.
No, they stayed open the entire time because they said it would be shut down for 2 weeks.
The reason why is because alcohol withdrawal, if you're an addict, is a lot of addictions won't kill you if you're an addict and you stop. Like heroin won't kill you to stop using it, but alcohol will. Alcohol can. So,
and they would have invaded the hospitals, and it would have been a disaster.
They would have been filling the hospitals. The hospitals would have been having to hand out alcohol. They would have been, what do you call it? They would have been robbing people's houses. You would have seen alcoholics raiding people's houses, going like, I need booze. Hopefully this person's got some. So
Yeah.
it would have been a real mistake for them. But I mean, a lot of people were just like, oh, well, they're just supporting these, the drunks. And I'm like, yeah, the costs of not doing it are so much worse than the cost of doing it. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
And it's going to get worse. The Fed in this country has been laying the groundwork with some of the improving their ability to manage electronic transfers, kind of a pre-CBDC. And I saw where Europe, the central bank president Legrand, was bragging a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that they put in a threshold limit of 1,000 euros being spent in cash or in digital coins like Bitcoin. €1,000 limit. If you spend more than that, you'll be gray sheeted and you can be considered a terrorist or money launderer. So you could be fined and or go to jail. Her word.
Wow, I spent more than that, like this week easily.
I
So
bet.
I mean, not in cash, but I mean, it could have.
Well, yeah, but it's just in cash or using Bitcoin. And I don't know exactly when that takes effect, but they really are putting, all the central banks really are moving toward getting rid of cash. They don't want cash. They can't track it. They can't tax it.
Mm-hmm.
They can't control it.
That's all mildly terrifying. And by mildly, I mean severely.
Yeah.
It's
Didn't
a
I see
brave
where
new world.
people were getting arrested or something for spending US dollars in Europe? I can't remember what article it was.
I hadn't seen that. Not sure.
I have to try to find it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know on that one.
Speaking of getting arrested, that's a beautiful segue right back into Madoff. The interesting thing, Madoff has such a history. The dude is truly legendary. He started out in the 60s, actually. He set up a little shop in his father-in-law's accounting firm, and he was trading what we call pink sheet stocks. Now, pink sheet stocks are stocks of, like, I refer to them as Ma and Pa stocks.
Okay. Is that like the same as penny stocks?
Yes, but most of them are actually sub-penny. They can go to a price as low as 0.0001. So you've got tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths of a dollar. So for
those seem like good stable investments.
Yeah, for $100 you could buy 1 million shares.
Well, it's just like the Twitter 7. That's what they were doing.
Yeah. If anybody saw the well-known movie Wolf of Wall Street with what was his name, Jordan Belfort, remember when he went into the little strip mall when he was looking for a job, and you had all these guys sitting at these desks just smiling and dialing, and telling people all these, making all these great claims about the potential of this stock. Nobody knew the price. You can't look back then. You couldn't look online. There was no computers, no internet, no computerized trading. So he could sell it at any price he wanted. And there was no way that they could know how much of it was his markup.
Oh, that seems like a good.
It's a good start.
Seems
for
like
a
good
fraudster.
system. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good way to wet your whistle if you're interested in fraud. And I found this beautiful little picture, and this one kind of tickles me a little bit. This picture came from the yearbook Corolla, which some of you might recognize as the yearbook for the University of Alabama. He never publicly spoke about why he wanted to go to Alabama, but in the book Madoff with Money, the author Oppenheimer recalls that there were several things that Madoff or appealed to Madoff. One, he wanted to get away from Queens. Two, he couldn't get accepted anywhere else. Alabama had easier entrance requirements and cheaper tuition. So that's why I went to Auburn, so I could mock Alabama.
Clay can't stay at Alabama. He is a go War Eagle Tiger thingy, whatever that is.
You may not, Ian. You may not be familiar with the Auburn and Alabama thing, but
I am not.
just think of, Auburn's colors are orange and blue, which also happens to be the favorite colors of the Almighty. And of course, Alabama is red and white, which is the colors of Satan. So you really have the opposition of good and evil personified. And
I take it there's a small rivalry, is what you're telling me.
Now we just hate the dirty gutter washing, cousin grinding slaves of Satan's.
Hang on. You went to Alabama as well.
I got my PhD from Alabama, but I considered my time there to be more of a missionary endeavor, preaching to the lost. Moses had his 40 years in the wilderness. I had my 4 years at Tuscaloosa. So now we're pulling them out of the weeds. Lynn Britton, roll tide roll.
That is the Alabama thing.
Yeah.
Oops.
It is a modestly intense rivalry. Literally, years ago, when Alabama was playing, I think it was Nebraska in a bowl game. They lost. It was a big upset. It was for number one championship game. And this was 20, 30 years ago. And that night set a new record in the state for heart attacks. People... And the worst fans in Alabama are the ones that didn't even go to Bama, didn't even go to college. So you'll be wearing an Auburn shirt down the street and they'll come up and get in your face and go, "Roll Tide." So it's an interesting combination of personalities and loyalties. So we never pass up a chance to gig each other. So for all you Bama fans out there, still love you. There's still time to repent and turn from the darkness. Come to the light. Come to the light. Oh, that's one thing. I worked in surgery, and I actually was assisting on a surgery for a Bama player, quarterback by the name of Jay Barker. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but anyway, as he was waking up,
HIPAA violation.
Yeah, probably. As he was waking
I didn't
up,
hear anything, so
I took the operating light and put it in his face and was sitting there whispering in the side, "Come to the light, come to the light." Yeah.
Let's see how many times we can get Clay off topic tonight.
I'm guessing all of them, but
yeah,
probably. But Bernie was dating his future wife, Ruth, and so he transferred from Alabama after a year or two and decided to finish up at Hofstra, which was closer to home.
And so that's the decision he made that you approve of.
Yes. Anything
Sorta.
to get away from, sorta. Of course, he was trained in the dark arts at Tuscaloosa, obviously. He went into practice and started practicing them and continued throughout his career. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Fair.
Speaking of the financial frauds, looking at some of the previous ones, Madoff was really no different than the others. He was a huge personality. He wasn't overtly outgoing, but in 101, he had kind of a presence, according to some people.
I was actually kind of surprised when I was looking into this one a little more of just how basic and ordinary it was. Like, I was expecting some sophisticated, whatever. And I was like, wait, that's it? That's the big scam? Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
He was very unremarkable in public. But when he would talk to somebody, he could overwhelm them or overpower them, so to speak, with his character, attitude, or whatever. And
call
people
that
trusted
charm.
him. Yeah. Individuals trusted him. And that's really how he attracted and got clients. His father would refer people to him, but once they met him, they thought, you know, he seems like a good guy, affable enough, and they put their money with him. He also had some widespread acclaim in the media. Now, Bernie academically wasn't anything to really write home about, but he wasn't, to me, he actually had some vision, because in the 60s, as he was trying to run on the pink sheets, he was competing against larger brokerages. You know, he was competing against the Merrill Lynches and E.F. Huttons and Bynum and Robhams and whatever of the day. And he was one of the first to utilize computers in order to try to manage quotes, prices for the stocks. He actually was one of the first, and some people kind of credit him for even establishing NASDAQ, which is one of the larger exchanges. NASDAQ is referred to as the over-the-counter market. For years, the biggest stock market exchange was the New York Stock Market, and it was literally an auction market. You would have individuals who were called market makers. Like, you might be a market maker for Ian, you might be a market maker for IBM. So you would be assigned literally an 18-inch square on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And if somebody wanted to buy or sell IBM, they knew where you were located and would come to you and tell you, I want to sell 1,000 shares. You'd tell them the price, boom, deal would be done.
And if you got to go to the bathroom, well, then
you develop the well-known 500-mile bladder. So it was an actual auction market. Well, NASDAQ is referred to as an over-the-counter market. There is no geographic location. You had these same people, market maker, broker. A broker is just a middleman. He never handles the stock. He just arranges the trade, and the two parties handle it between themselves. He just connects the two. A market maker literally buys the stock for his own inventory and then will sell out of his inventory. So a market maker is the one legally charged with maintaining an orderly market in the stock, to kind of support prices, to buy it when nobody else is buying, to sell it when nobody else is selling, theoretically. So that's the difference in a market maker and a broker. Well, Bernie actually had a market-making business, and it was a legitimate business. And it was this business that he was one of the first to computerize. Hence, the SEC and a few others relied on him and his expertise in forming NASDAQ. So he was somewhat of an innovator. Got to give him credit for that. He changed, in a number of ways, the manner in which securities were traded. So he starts off,
and later he would change it again.
Oh, he's not done yet. He's not done. He was also the first to implement a payment for order flow. This has now come to be known as a maker-taker system, a little bit slightly different. But the idea of a payment for order flow is, with NASDAQ, you had several market makers that might be trading a stock. So they would kind of be competing on price. Well, Bernie, there was no easy way to compare the prices. So Bernie came up with an idea of taking part of his commission that he made as a market maker and paying it to investment firms that used him to execute the trade. So if you went to a broker, for example, and wanted to buy shares of IBM, they could send it. Well, IBM's a New York stock, but let's say, what was an early NASDAQ stock? Let's just say Apple. When Apple was small and unknown, if you wanted to buy Apple, you could go to several different brokers. Well, Bernie would actually pay you part of what he made on the trade to use him. So that's a way to encourage order flow to you as a market maker. And he was the first to start that. So again,
that
kind
caught
of
on.
yeah. And that's one reason why he grew so big so fast. And it's legal, it's legitimate. It's, kind of everybody does it now. But it was an incentive for the broker to use a particular market maker. And it's sometimes referred to as a legal kickback, which is what it is, but it's still legal.
I mean,
And
anytime somebody's got to put legal in front of something, it's that's always a warning sign.
I figured you as a lawyer might have a deep appreciation for that.
Yeah, it's like anytime you're like, well, this is a legal X, it's like, for how long? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Although it sounds like this one's caught on, but
yeah,
I mean, the stock market's its own kind of weird Wild West where it seems like the rules only change whenever something goes terribly wrong.
It's kind of like government.
Yeah.
I don't even know how many pages of regs there are governing stock market transactions, but the more regs they are, the easier
All of them
to cheat. Yeah. To me, if I was king, it'd be real simple. I'd have like half a page of rules. You pay for what you buy, you deliver what you sell, you disclose everything that's material. Other than that, I don't really know what regs you need, but with the regulation complexity and the lack of transparency, the confusion, I mean, Madoff is a guy that was actually examined by the SEC 8 different times. And due to the complexity of the rules, he was found in compliance. He met the letter of the law when they had a specific issue. So, it got to me, it's gotten so complex, we no longer can define lying, cheating, and stealing. To me, if you don't know what those are, you ought to just stay out of the market.
I mean, I feel like a lot of them know what they are. They just also don't care.
They don't care, and it's hard to enforce if somebody is, has their I's dotted and the T's crossed, so to speak.
It's always tough to deal with bad actors in a system.
Yeah.
Because systems tend to be... Oh, go ahead.
Someone who was a crook once told me, you learn the rules, then you do what you want within those rules.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of those rules tend to be built on the assumption that people are going to be more or less decent. And
Yes.
And then they have to get built out from there based on, oh, wait, no, that turns out not to be true.
Yeah, we can just never have enough rules to, what's the word I'm looking for, to handle or address man's imagination. Man is more creative than, people in the business are more creative than regulators. It reminds me somewhat of General Patton's old adage, the World War II general. He once said, talking about like the French Maginot Line,
yeah,
he referred to it as a monument to man's stupidity, because there is no fixed or fortified defense that can't be bypassed.
Yep.
And so I see, a lot of the issues when these frauds, and the same thing with FTX and some others. Sometimes it's hard for regulators to find the fraud because the system is so complex. But Bernie did it. He did it well. His business grew by the early 90s. It was like 15% of the volume on the New York Stock Exchange. So he had a huge chunk of business. And this is his legal side, his legal business. Now, one thing that caused him some problems was in 2000, all of the markets switched from 1/32 pricing to decimal point. And when I say 1/32, I mean like 1/32.
Yeah.
All stocks, bonds were priced in 30 seconds. With 30 seconds, the spread. Now, if you look at a stock price or a bond price in the Wall Street Journal, you'll see two prices, a bid and an ask. One of them's a little higher than the other. You buy at the higher price and sell at the low. If you conducted an immediate transaction, obviously those prices move throughout the day. But that difference is called the spread. Well, when you were pricing in 32s, the minimum spread was 1/32. Most of them would be about an eighth, which was 12.5 cents a share. I'll make sense of this here in a second. So when it's under the 30 seconds, the average spread was 12.5 cents a share. After decimalization, when it went to pennies, that dropped to 1 cent a share. So revenues from trading stocks dropped precipitously after decimalization. So that had to be made up somewhere. Boom. Bernie had his legitimate business, but he had been running a small fund, quote unquote, the hedge fund. Me personally, I kind of don't like the name hedge fund because hedge funds are legitimate funds. They only allow generally accredited investors. Accredited investor in the U.S. is somebody that has a net worth of more than $1 million. And they aren't as regulated as mutual funds. They don't have all the reporting requirements. But Madoff's fund was never regulated. It never complied with the reporting or whatever requirements, even for hedge funds. Bernie Madoff wasn't registered as an investment advisor. It wasn't a hedge fund. So I refer to it as Bernie's slush fund, which to me is kind of what it was.
Well, he never invested any of the money in anything.
No. And
yeah,
it was
was one of the weird things. I was like, this should have been obvious, right?
It was his slush fund. And the reason it wasn't obvious, one, because he never registered it. He never reported it. He never advertised it. So in some sense, the SEC never knew it existed. So I remember maybe it was the 5th time he was investigated. They went to him and asked, Mr. Madoff, are you running a fund? Are you an advisor to a fund? He said, no. They said, okay, fine. Now you got to remember, this guy was highly respected. He had not only helped start the NASDAQ, but he had been president of it 3 terms. And he had worked with the SEC on developing regulations for computerized trading. So most of the people in the SEC held him in fairly high regard.
It's starting to sound a little bit like Sam Bankman-Fried, who was big on pushing, like, I am the regulator and all. Like, I will help set up regulations and all of this.
Use me as the example on how to regulate and run exchanges. That's
Yep.
just beautiful to me.
I mean, I feel like in hindsight that maybe he was not the greatest of choices on that.
No, maybe not. But just the hubris, knowing how absolutely sloppy he was in running his exchange, his fund, his whatever. He had no shame. And, Madoff didn't have a whole lot either.
Yeah, well, I feel like that's always kind of the case, is that a lot of this stuff is done by people who are just willing to do things that no one else will.
Nurse M, how did he create all those statements to all those investors over the years? His investors were getting statements. And the way he did it was he had a couple of trusted people, quote unquote, managing the slush fund, but they would hire high school kids to come in and make up trades. They would give them amounts and then let the kids go back through, see what the stock price had been for that day and moved or whatever. And they would create transactions that they would then literally print out on a dot matrix printer. And this was even in the 2000s, after we had laser printers or whatever. They were using remember the old lined white and green paper?
Yep.
That had the holes down the side?
Oh, I remember it. I can still hear the noise that those things made.
They had a rhythm, didn't they?
A rhythm is a way to put it.
An annoyance.
Yeah, but here he was managing hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for a client. And in a day and age when people were generating laser, printed statements on letterhead, et cetera, and his clients were getting this green computer paper in the mail.
And feeling super privileged to do it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that should have been a red flag or you just admired his frugality or what. I don't know, but that's interesting. And Bernie was good with imaging. He moved and located his business to what was known as the Lipstick Building. And there it is. And if you look at the picture closely, you can tell it's got 3 tiers. Well, yep. Bernie owned the 3 floors right off this tier, the one below, the one at the tier, and the one above, 17th, 18th, and 19th floor.
Huh.
His office and the legitimate trading business was on the 19th. The 18th held the computers and the records, and the 17th floor held the fund. Now, the fund... Here's a picture of the 17th floor office, give you an idea of what it looked like. The fund was off limits to everybody but Bernie and the director, Frank, a couple of trusted administrators and accountants, and then the high school kids. So there were...
I feel like that's itself a red flag.
Yeah, it is. It is, but he kept it. He apparently kept it away from the other 125 people working on the 18th and 19th floors. They knew very little or nothing about it.
Because those 2 floors were somewhat legitimate. The 17th floor was not legitimate at all.
And, the SEC and many of the people working didn't even know he had offices in the 17th floor. His sons did, but they were never allowed to go down there or even ask him about it. Apparently, as best as we know today.
Well, I wonder how much that was intended to protect his sons, but that's only pure speculation.
Yeah, I wonder, but their reaction, and the SEC tore through everything they could find in terms of
Oh yeah.
transactions, at interviews with office staff, and they couldn't come up with anything. But just looking at the reactions of the two sons, one of them, Mark, hung himself 2 years to the day Madoff was arrested.
I mean, that one I kind of find might be consistent with either way, right? Because
Well, true, yeah.
if you're sitting there spending the whole time waiting, like, when are they going to catch me? And, then I'm going to go to jail for the rest of my life. But, I mean, it could be that, or it could be serious guilt. But I do know Viking Wolf is noting that they, the aspect of they turned him in, which is also, I feel like, a factor in their favor, but not necessarily a determinative factor, because sometimes people get cold feet.
Yeah, the only thing that did it to me, or I guess has me believing that they were rather well insulated, is even Bernie's secretary, several people in the office talk about Bernie yelling at them once, inquiring about this some other business or other lines of business, and Bernie told them just to stick to what they did.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I mean, I guess all of this would be really, thoroughly investigated at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's no way we can know for sure, but the fund was collapsing for months before it did. Bernie had seen the writing on the wall.
I mean, as these things tend to do.
Yeah, and this was during the subprime crisis. After Lehman collapsed in September of 2008, nobody was lending. Everybody was screaming for their money. And that's one thing that gave Bernie legitimacy through the years, for the 20 years he was doing this, because he met every withdrawal request.
Yep. That's usually where things fall apart, is that somebody can't meet a withdrawal request. And then it's like, well, why not? Like, you say the money exists. Why is it a problem?
Yeah, he had such huge cash inflows, particularly when things got going well, that he could meet the withdrawals until 2008.
Well, subprime crisis killed. I mean, there were calls on the market. There were. I mean, I was working in a hair salon. I was a hairstylist for 14 years, and I know that the guy that owned the salon, his line of credit on his house got canceled, even though he'd never borrowed on it. It was just kind of just in case something at the salon happens, I have to make this big payment for something, it'll be there. I mean, that was a disaster.
Oh yeah, lots of people got in a lot of difficulty with people who'd been making payments for years. Suddenly their bank is like, we're calling in your loan, like, we're not letting you renew your loan. And they're like, why not? Well, because we changed the rules. So yeah, that hurt a lot of people.
Wouldn't be terribly shocked, but we'd see some of that again before long.
Yep.
Just as a nice little aside.
There's a lot of people right now who are, as interest rates are going up, the banks are like, you no longer qualify for the loan that you had. And they're like, what do you mean? Bank is just going, sorry, no.
Rates have increased from 1.5% to 6-7%. Lending standards have tightened at the same time.
Yep. So it's going to be a challenge for a lot of people, I think.
I agree. We haven't seen the worst of it yet.
Yep. And I mean, it's going to be unfortunate, because there's a lot of people who sort of made plans through no fault of their own that are really going to sort of be looking at this going, how do I make this work? My wife and I have been sort of trying our best to pay off debts over time, and that's starting to feel like a real good move.
It is.
It is.
It's like
echo yell. This is a little picture of of Madoff's legitimate business, the trading floor, he had probably about 125 people working for him total, which, if he had really been running a true hedge fund, would be a, plus the trading business would be a way small number. And that's one way he was able to keep it all concealed, because there were just very, very few people. One, you didn't need anybody to manage a bank account. He kept an average of $5 to $10 billion in the Morgan Chase account. Never did anything with it. Had some inflows, had some outflows, and that was it. So it's a relatively simple slush fund to manage. Not a whole lot of sophistication to it, but it was easy to keep secret. Now, why did people keep going to Madoff?
Well, not just going to him, they begged.
They begged.
They were pulling in connections because, he was, one of the things I thought was really kind of clever in its own way is he was turning business down, which is like unheard of for a Ponzi scheme.
It gave him an aura of exclusivity to some people.
There were people who basically noted that they were quite surprised that it had fallen apart because they had to go through so much effort to get included in the first place, and then they lost everything, after having to basically fight their way in.
Well, here's a graph I took from a paper, actually. There was a paper done looking at the performance of Bernie's quote-unquote fund based on statements that he had sent to a client. Here it is. And I got to give credit where credit's due. Amazing Returns, Analysis of the Split Strike Conversion Strategy by Bernard and Boyle. So this is one of the graphs from that study. And the red line in the middle is Madoff's performance, the growth of his fund.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, it's almost perfectly linear.
Yep.
In the 215 months that this study covered, he only had, and that's nearly 18 years worth of data. They only had like 15 or 16 down months. So you had 100.
Just doesn't happen.
No, you never, it's mathematically impossible to see this kind of consistent return. And this is what bothered some people who actually, as Madoff had success and his fund grew, there were other hedge funds that wanted to replicate his strategy so that they could attract some of the business.
Yep.
And so when they, Madoff, he was doing an interview with Leslie Stahl, I think it was, and he talked about his strategy. He described it as a very low risk strategy, but yet he was earning abnormal, modestly high returns. And he explained his strategy as, he called it, a split strike conversion option strategy. That's a fancy name. In finance and trading, we just call it a collar. Because think of, you've got a stock price in the middle. And if it goes too high, it's sold. If it goes too low, it's sold. So you kind of collar the returns. It's a way to hedge the fund. He was writing an out-of-the-money call and buying an out-of-the-money put, a call. Calls and puts are options. A call. Anybody from Arkansas in the chat? Or anybody have a hog farm? Because if you've been around or familiar with a hog farm, you will call the pigs at dinner time. In Arkansas, they use the term "suey pig," yelling at the top of their lungs. Okay, see, that's the great thing about finance. You get educated in culture and agriculture and music. It just touches on everything. But a call lets you buy the stock at the contractual price. A put lets you put the stock on somebody at a contractual price. So Bernie said he would sell the call, giving somebody the right to buy the stock from him at a price. And he would buy a put, giving him the right to put the stock on somebody at a price. So the call, if the stock price went up, it would be called away from him. He'd lose the stock. He'd get the contractual price, but he'd lose any gains over that. A put, if the price dropped, he could sell it to somebody at the contractual price and reduce his downside risk. The advantage of buying one and selling the other is the cost offset each other. So you can do it at a very, very low price, if any. That's kind of the idea. Well, everybody took this strategy and tried to replicate it using historical stock and option prices, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't come up with the returns that he did. So there were some articles written about, some people did, some competitive hedge fund managers did. Barron's even wrote an article on it in the early 90s, and they speculated that his consistent returns were from Madoff front-running trades based off his market maker business and front-running.
What is
if you're a market front-running is where if you're a market maker, you see, somebody comes to you and wants to sell 1 million shares of Apple. Well, something in that size is going to move the price a nickel. So front running is where you take your order and put it in ahead of this big order. You put your order in front.
And I'm guessing that's not allowed.
That would be highly illegal.
That seemed like a form of insider trading that they would have some opinions on.
Exactly. And so the speculation was that Madoff was front running trades, making small returns. But if you do it, if you make a nickel a trade if you're a market maker in NASDAQ, you may be market making for, let's say, 100 stocks. So a nickel a trade on 100 stocks that are traded 100 times every second, every 5 seconds. So that nickel turns into $50 per second, and you do the math from there. You can make good money by making incremental increases on each trade.
Yeah.
So that was the speculation. But even then, the SEC came in several times, looked at his market making business, and found no evidence of any front running. Remember I said earlier, he was investigated 8 times. So, they would be looking at, I don't know what to call it, smoke, where there was no fire. They were looking in the wrong.
They're looking to try to catch him on front running, which of course he's not doing because none of that money was actually doing anything.
Yeah, there was no
corresponding
trades.
Yeah, what they should have been checking is just, are you even doing anything with this?
Well, the funny thing is, there were some of the funds, like one of the hedge funds, Rampart, came across an investor that was telling them about Madoff's accomplishments. And obviously Madoff was getting to be a pretty big name in NASDAQ and on the street. And they assigned one of their lead quants, Frank, what was his name? Moronopoulos. I'll just call him Frank, to try to replicate Bernie's fund. And when looking at Bernie's performance, after about 4 minutes, he said, this is impossible. This isn't real. It's not happening. So he spent the next several days trying to mathematically prove that Bernie was a fraud. And interestingly, the dude wrote a letter to the SEC. Let me get the right one up here.
I remember this letter, and it was notable in part because he's like, I've got no financial incentive in this, but somebody's got to do something about this guy.
Exactly. And in his letter that he addresses to the SEC, the New York branch, he gives two possible scenarios that involve fraud. One, front running. Two, and remember, this is in 2000 or 2001. Scenario two, highly likely. Madoff Securities is the world's largest Ponzi scheme. So this was literally 7 or 8 years before the fund collapsed.
I feel like this guy now should have just unlimited I told you so rights.
I mean, he stalked Madoff for years and just kept producing things. And he listed a number of things that demonstrated that Madoff could not be achieving the returns. I personally have run split strike conversion strategies and know that the approach is far riskier than stated in number 6 above. Strategy is inferior. And he just goes on and he details the history. He looked at the actual investments, actual days of trading, and showed that there was no way Madoff could be doing what he claimed to do. He detailed it. He laid it all out. Listed red flag after red flag after red flag. The SEC's response to this, to me, is kind of fascinating. They basically had none. They basically took it and filed it. Didn't do anything. The SEC was pretty close to Madoff. I mean, they started investigating, for example, in 1992, remember I mentioned how Madoff got his start with his father-in-law?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when his father-in-law retired, the firm was sold or turned over to two of the senior accountants, Avellino and Bienes. Well, they continued referring clients to Bernie because of the kickbacks they were getting. What was it? They made $35 million in 10 years referring clients to Bernie. This was in the 90s.
Now, did they end up having to repay any of that, or did they just get to keep all that?
Well, they were investigated in the 90s, and the SEC found them to be selling unregistered. This is interesting as hell to me. The SEC found them to be selling unregistered securities. What unregistered securities were they selling?
I'm guessing Madoff's grand scheme.
Madoff.
Yeah.
They never mentioned Madoff. They never mentioned the fund. They never questioned Madoff. Madoff is currently in his second term as NASDAQ chair.
So wait, this was while they still hadn't sort of officially discovered Madoff, and yet they ought to have, like, this is the point where it's like, oh, right, you had to have known at this point.
Yeah. They're like, okay, you two guys are selling unregistered securities. Well, would it strike you as reasonable for the SEC to investigate who was issuing the unregistered securities?
You'd think that you'd want to shut those unregistered securities right down.
You know, if it's illegal to sell, it ought to be illegal to issue, as far as I understand SEC law. But nothing, never took it any further.
Oh, lovely. And I bet there's some people who are real thrilled about that, who lost all their money.
It gets even better. We're not done yet.
Oh, good.
Not in a good way, though.
Not in a good way, though. The SEC investigated Madoff again in 1999 and 2000. Madoff was accused of hiding customer orders from other traders. So Madoff said he would take corrective measures, and that was the end of that. 2001. Remember, I mentioned Harry Markopolis? He was with Rampart. This is when he challenged, Madoff's performance, showed there was no way mathematically for him to achieve those results. And he basically, outright said Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme with high probability. Harry also found, for Madoff's strategy to work, one thing I didn't mention is that he would have had to buy more options, calls and puts, on the stocks listed than existed at that time. So Madoff was claiming to buy, 2, 3, 500% of the available options.
And this is actually something that's really common with these kinds of schemes, is that one of the problems you run into is just the size of the universe.
Yes.
And so, like, a Ponzi scheme, theoretically, so long as you can keep bringing in people forever, is a great investment. It just requires a universe that has an infinite number of people in it.
Yes.
And
obviously better to be early than late.
Yeah, well,
obviously.
The problem is you get in early, and then, then they, start saying things like, why shouldn't you be in jail? Which is not a good place to be, I don't think.
Yeah. If it's a Ponzi scheme.
It's kind of like a pyramid.
It is.
I don't want to say
scheme.
all.
Yeah.
I don't want to say
so
all.
So to speak.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
Well, folks, we're not done yet. 2003. There's additional complaints, and they are investigated by a guy named Eric Swanson for the SEC. Eric Swanson during this investigation, he met Bernie's niece, Shana Madoff, who was the chief compliance officer. Well, in 2004 and 5, the SEC investigated again complaints of front running, and they examined the broker ops, found nothing. They were completely unaware of the slush fund. But the SEC findings were kept confidential. They were investigated by an officer by the name of Genevieve Walker Lightfoot, who raised questions about Madoff to her boss, Eric Swanson. Well, she was told to concentrate on another case. A year later, Swanson married Shana Madoff.
Oh, God.
Yeah. This is just beautiful. It's just setting up beautiful. 2007.
Starting to sound like, Trudeau and his dealings. How everybody around him ends up being connected in some fashion.
We have our own Trudeau named Hillary, but nonetheless. 2007. SEC actually investigated Madoff for a Ponzi scheme. This is where they went and asked him, "Are you running a fund?" And he goes, "No, of course not. Investigation's closed. There was no finding of fraud, no referral to enforcement for legal action. End of story."
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And, I came across something else. There was a mathematician by the name of Ed Thorpe who in 1991 came across a claim by Bernie to have purchased 123 call options by P&G on April the 16th. So Thorpe goes back and pulls the records. Obviously, he had to go do it by hand, but he goes to the trouble, pulls the records of the options traded that day. Madoff said he bought 123. Well, only 20 were traded. Thorpe again reported this, did a public little story on it. Nothing came out of it. So the fascinating thing, I don't know if I can say cool, but the fascinating
we can say cool,
thing,
but it's in a dark kind of way.
Yeah. There were so many red flags, so many potential opportunities for people to know that something was sketchy. Got a question from Hedgehog here, or a comment from Hedgehog. What happens when you stack multiple levels on each other? You get a
pyramid.
Pyramid. Oh, okay. I was like, red triangle. Let me think here. I got to get better at the sign language.
It sometimes can be a puzzle.
Yeah, I don't have your experience, so I will defer to your expertise.
Sometimes it's just a matter of guessing.
Lynn Britton, don't look behind the curtain. Just listen to what I say and believe. It's almost kind of Wizard of Oz type stuff.
Yep.
You had this powerful man pulling all the levers and everything. Behind the curtain, once the curtain was pulled, it was almost embarrassing how little was there. Much, much different than imagined.
And I mean, that's really sadly kind of common with these things, is that once it all unfolds, everyone's like, why wasn't this obvious sooner? And usually the answer is it was, just nobody was actually wanting to ask the question. Nobody actually wanted to look at it.
Know.
Or they were getting paid to look the other way.
Well, or just, not necessarily getting paid to look the other way. It's just once you're making money off something, it's kind of hard to say like, hey, I'm going to, tear this down.
True.
And that's one thing, kind of emphasize on this channel, not to be, patting myself on the back, but it is just simply good advice for me, for anybody. If you don't know and understand what you're investing in, don't invest. Don't do it. If somebody objects, there were several people who came to Madoff asking, about their funds and investment and, what was going on. He would get mad at them and he would threaten to kick them out of the fund. Well, if somebody objects or has a problem with you understanding what's going on with your money, that's all you need to know. Take your money and go find somebody that'll work with you. If you don't know what's going on with your money, don't invest. There's so many people out there that are willing to, if you don't want to go to the trouble to know what's going on with your money, there's a lot of people out there that will liberate you from the responsibility of having to do that.
I saw an interview with one person who had noted that they sort of got, and at this point, Madoff was quite illustrious. So they got this like opportunity to meet this guy and, to sort of talk about investing their money. And they're like, so how do you do this? And they said that his explanations were kind of like wishy-washy and, sketchy. And so he was like, so I decided not to invest in it. And, of course, for that person, it turns out to be one of the greatest decisions of their life because, it went very badly for the people who did decide to invest in it.
Yeah, I believe that was a Canadian, Ron Picard of the Royal Bank of Canada.
That may have
he-
been because that might have been why they were talking about it.
Yeah, he met with Madoff, and he was actually quoted as saying Madoff, either he didn't understand what he was doing, or he wasn't doing what he said he was doing.
And that's a great description.
Bingo. And that was in the press. Fidelity manager, Tillinghast, kind of a prominent. Now, Fidelity is a family of funds. They've got probably 300 or 400 funds now. Huge fund family. And one of their managers in the early 2000s met with Markakopoulos, met with him for an hour because they were interested in trying to replicate Madoff's strategy. And he came away just after an hour meeting convinced that Madoff was a fraud, that nothing about his strategy made sense. So for people on the street, I mean, there was an article in a popular street derivatives paper called Marhedge, and one in Barron's that I have alluded to previously pointed out investors were amazed or incredulous about his consistency in achieving positive returns. Remember that graph that was so linear?
Yeah.
That's astounding. Absolutely.
I mean, you look at that and you just go like, that looks like fraud.
He's
that
the only
looks,
one in the world that could ever do that.
Because I mean,
Nobody
any investment
understood.
you make goes up and down, and
It'll fluctuate.
Yep.
Nobody understood his strategy. But the SEC maintained this whole time. Yeah, true. The SEC maintained this whole time he wasn't managing money assets. Gail, I've been saying that for years. Never understood crypto, so I never went there. Don't understand structured notes. So until I get an explanation, I do understand not going to invest. Well, Gail, maybe you've come to the right place. We actually had a video earlier on crypto. Haven't done one yet on structured notes, but put in a request and we'll be glad to do it.
Clay has got a few videos on crypto and explaining exactly what he actually teaches this at UNCW, exactly what it is and how it works. And a friend of mine, actually, we all went to Christmas together, and he was about to start teaching this class a few years ago, and we made him sit down and explain it to us. And they were like, "That's too complicated. Simplify." We don't get it. And she's in finance. So we were just like, start again. So I hope we made him a better teacher, but he does have a couple great videos on crypto.
Yeah, and can always get better at my chosen.
The other one, or the one that sort of struck me was NFTs, because I had a whole bunch of people who were like, "Oh yeah, you got to get into NFTs," and I'm like, "Walk me through this. Like, why is this why is this useful?" And they're like, "This," and I'm like, "No, that doesn't make any sense." Because they're saying things like, "Well, and then you own this thing," and I'm like, "So do I get the copyright out of this somehow?" No, you don't get the copyright. You don't need that. I'm like, well, what am I getting that's actually of value? Well, you get this unique link, and I'm like, I'm getting a link. What am I going to do with a link? Like, seriously? So, yeah, I didn't invest in any NFTs, and I'm feeling pretty entertained about that. When I saw NFTs, I was like, is there a way for me to short these? And
you should. That would be awesome.
For those wondering about NFTs, you're looking at them. NFTs are non-fungible tokens, which is simply a fancy name for a unique digital code. And that digital code creates a picture. And here you've basically
got a link to a picture is the worst part. You don't even have the picture. Like the picture's not embedded in the NFT. It's a link to a picture. So there's no guarantee that's permanent.
Well, you have legal rights to that image.
Usually
at least
you
granted
don't.
by the producer.
Yeah, there's not necessarily any legal rights to them. So it can be really stupid.
You can change one tiny thing and then it's yours and you own it. It's the weirdest thing.
Yeah, here you've got the same basic shape, but you change the hat, you put a candle on it, you change, the color of this little S, whatever. And that each one of those is a separate NFT. And that's what people buy, normally for somewhere around $25 to $35. Some people will pay $50. It just depends. When some of these came out,
some of them were going for stupid prices for a while.
Yeah. Now, if I could buy the rights to the Coca-Cola picture logo,
I mean, sure, but if you actually got the rights to it,
yeah.
But I mean, that's a different scenario than what we're looking at. And a lot of these NFT guys were having these like really weird notions, like did you see the thing with the Dune book? Where they're like, we're going to buy the Dune book, we're going to destroy it and make an NFT, and then we will own Dune. And it's like, none of this makes legal sense. You're just going to destroy a valuable antique for nothing. It was bizarre.
Didn't see that.
Oh, it was a bit of a farce. They spent this huge amount of money on a rare copy of Dune out of the notion that would get them to own Dune.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Do not recommend.
Do not recommend. Yeah. Save your money. If you've got money burning a hole in your pants and you just, or skirt or whatever you're wearing at the time, kilt.
Just a
and
pocket.
You need to get with the pocket. You need to get rid of it. I'll be glad to give you my Venmo account.
Yeah.
So I promise you it'll go to good use.
I mean, in a lot of cases, you'd actually be better off burning your money in the fireplace in winter than with some of these investments.
Something out of it.
Yeah, you'd at least save like a fraction of a cent on your gas bill.
You get some warmth out of it for a few minutes.
When something is called a non-fungible token.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, non-fungible is just a fancy word for unique. Fungible is common. Like a dollar bill is fungible because $1 bill is, well, except for the serial number, is the same as another dollar bill.
Like a bushel of a particular grain of wheat, which trades against another bushel of the same grade of wheat anywhere, and you don't get a specific bushel necessarily if you're, when they're doing this kind of transaction with, or a barrel of oil at a particular grade. Yeah. It's just
fungible. Fungible just means one will replace another. Non-fungible means each is unique.
Yeah.
Fancy terms.
It's not really.
I mean, lots of things are non-fungible. An artwork is non-fungible because, there isn't a second Mona Lisa that you can swap in for the first one. And that applies even to, any unique artwork where it's like a $20 artwork or whatever. It's still non-fungible with another. But, it's a lot of people got caught up on that uniqueness aspect and didn't realize that uniqueness is actually really common.
I was going to say a haircut is non-fungible. That doesn't mean I would invest in it.
Yeah.
I was going to say one of the most disappointing moments of my life was actually seeing the Mona Lisa.
Oh, it's a tiny little thing behind 17 layers of bulletproof glass.
And behind 15 people that you can see it, even less. Yeah, I was expecting this full-size portrait and be able to get up and examine the detail, look at it. No, you've got a rope, you've got bulletproof glass. Thank you, idiots. And you just, it's like looking at, a postcard 5 feet away.
David was much more impressive.
I recommend going to see the sculptures if you're in the same, rather than skip the Mona Lisa.
Yep.
Yeah, go to Florence, Italy. Much better.
I think they've got the Venus de Milo at the Louvre as well. It's a better
Yes.
place to go.
That was, there's a lot of impressive things, but the Mona Lisa is not one of them. It is almost
it's a huge disappointment.
Yeah, it is. All right. So Bernie Madoff, the end, you had the subprime crisis cranking up, wreaking havoc everywhere, all over the country. And in the fall of 2008, we saw the Lehman Brothers collapse. This obviously terrified investors. The market was collapsing. People were wanting their money out of anything they had invested in.
Yeah, everyone's getting nervous.
In addition, there was a fund called the Bayou Fund. I don't know if y'all have heard of that or not. There was so much else going on. It really didn't get a lot of publicity, but on the street, it was exposed as a Ponzi scheme. This was earlier in the summer, early fall of 2008. So you had, a lot of more informed investors who that made them scared. So they started asking for money. So you were getting huge redemption requests. Madoff had probably 150 million in redemption request. He only had $12 million in the bank. So he managed to buy some time by using Hello Chunk.
He was
managed to buy
wanting some attention. Sorry.
Good. Lou will be next.
Mm-hmm.
Ian, did you see our puppy cam earlier?
I did not, but I'm enjoying the puppy cam now. Pups are always a welcome addition.
Chunk is one of the main contributors and sounding boards for the show.
I keep thinking I need to set up something where I can have a camera in my backyard so I can have a stream where the pups can run around and be like, okay, here's puppy cam.
And there's Tallulah.
What are the puppers' names? This is Tallulah, who is 7 pounds, and this is Chunk. Hang on, who is 17 pounds at least. So yeah, and this is his mama.
Yeah, Chunk is the son of Tallulah. We don't know how he got that big, but he's more than twice her size.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
maybe the world's largest Morkies. We ought to send him off to Guinness and let them certify.
I know. He's so big.
So Madoff's getting all these requests for cash. He doesn't have the cash, but he did have a line of credit attached to his legitimate brokerage firm, and he tapped it. So the panic passed. Some of the investors came back after that. This was, summer of 2008.
They wanted those sweet returns.
They wanted that sweet cash. By the end of September, in total for the year, he had handed out $7 billion. Remember, he kept anywhere from 5 to 10 billion in the Chase account. So he had handed out about 7 billion, and by November he had 300 million left.
Is this like I think Ian might know this. Didn't SBF take like $1 million or $1 billion loan from FTX or Alameda? Right before
I forget which direction that was going, but yeah, there was some weird financial, sketchiness.
Yeah, he took out loans, and the day it failed, somebody with the passwords accessed their trading system and transferred out 400 million in Bitcoin. Don't know who. Absolutely no idea who. Somebody. Be it far from me to accuse anybody. But There were only a couple people that had passwords. So November, Madoff's running out of options. He tried to borrow money. These may be two of the worst investments ever. In November, he got $10 million from a guy by the name of Martin Roseman. And on December the 1st, he got $250 million from Carl Shapiro. Same day, he told his fund manager, Frank DePascali, that he was done. So he knows he's going to fold, and he's still borrowing money from close friends. What a guy.
Oh, geez.
What a guy.
With friends like that, who needs enemies?
So December the 1st, December the 5th, on December the 9th, he told his brother, Madoff told his brother that he was done. And on the 10th is when Madoff told his sons, Mark and Andrew. On the 10th is when he told his sons. And he also suggested that out of the remaining funds, he pay out $170 million in bonus to them and to some of the employees. He admitted to his sons that it was a Ponzi scheme. Well, after the crying and wailing and gnashing of teeth, his sons left and called their attorney and explained to him what was going on. He then contacted the SEC and FBI. The next morning on the 11th, FBI agent by the name of Theodore Cassioppi. Why can't people have names that are easier for me to pronounce? You think that would be a standard? Anyway,
that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. So they go to Madoff's door, December the 11th, knock on the door. Madoff comes to the door. The agent said, hey, we're from the FBI, and we're here to find out if there's an innocent explanation. And Madoff looked at him and said, there is no innocent explanation. He said,
all it took was somebody asking.
Yeah. He said, it's a Ponzi and it's over. He was arrested.
Wow.
The well-known Bernie. We actually have his mugshot. There he is, December the 11th, the day he was arrested.
It's actually not a bad-looking mugshot. Because a lot of mugshots look pretty awful, right?
It looks better than my driver's license picture.
I was just thinking the same thing. I was like, man, so.
Good old, if you got to go out, you might as well go out with a good mugshot, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, most, they actually sometimes advise celebrities and so forth on all of this is if you're going to get a mugshot taken, make sure you're smiling and not looking, miserable, because it's going to be on all the, it's going to be on all the news. So you got to make sure that looks like a glamour shot, so they can't use it against you as easily.
But I'll admit that's not a bad mugshot. So he's arrested. They also, when they arrested him, they asked, who else was involved, and Bernie said it was just me. I'm the only one that knew. Now, obviously, they
hopefully didn't believe that.
No, they kept investigating and ended up arresting DePascali, who was the director, basically, of the fund. He pled guilty to 10 counts of conspiracy, securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, etc. And he agreed to connect the dots for the investigators. Hopefully, I guess, in hopes of a reduced sentence. But he pled guilty, and while awaiting sentencing, he died of lung cancer.
Okay, so it wasn't like mysterious circumstances. That's a fairly obvious kind of thing there.
Yep. I wouldn't have been surprised if there were some mysterious circumstances, but doesn't look like that's it. Laura, that's a smug shot. He does look a little bit smugged,
Kinda
and also
does.
like, he effed around and he's finding out.
Yep, just a little bit.
Madoff's sons worked in the legitimate trading side. Their assets were frozen, and obviously suits filed against them and Ruth, his wife. And then I've already mentioned that on the second anniversary of Madoff's arrest, they found Mark hanging from a metal pipe in his apartment. He was there with his 3-year-old daughter. Andrew,
that's but
yeah, that's tragic. I can't believe he did it with the baby, but it was ruled a suicide. Andrew died in 2014, the other brother, also from cancer. Andrew never saw his father after the incarceration. Ruth, the wife, agreed to keep only $2.5 million out of $80 million in assets, gave up all the property. They had only 2.5. And this is in 2009 or 10.
Only.
When
you hear about the rich and the punishments they get, you're just like, isn't that hard for you?
Well, she didn't even attend his sentencing. The whole family just separated from him, was estranged from him.
Well, I mean, why would you want to have anything to do with him? You wouldn't want to be seen with him if you ever want to sort of reclaim a spot in society.
Yeah, they just felt like he destroyed his whole life. Now, Ruth did agree in a civil settlement. She was sued by some of the trustees for the reclamation fund. She agreed in a civil settlement to surrender her assets to Picard, who's the head trustee for the main Bernie Madoff fund, when she dies. So she gets to, keep live off the money. She does have to report to him everything she spends money on, anything over $100. But when she dies, everything goes to the victims.
Okay.
I thought that was kind of an interesting arrangement. 2 back office staff, Joanne Cruppy and Annette Bongiorno, were arrested, tried, and sentenced for 6 years each. Interestingly to me, the controller, the person that signed the checks to handle the disbursements from the slush fund, Enrica Pitts.
Yeah.
Well, she pled guilty, but no jail time.
Huh. That's she got lucky.
Yeah, and I don't know how much she not collaborated, but cooperated with the FBI, the SEC. But no prison. Couldn't find out any details on her, but no prison time for her. Some of the feeders to the Madoff fund, he had investment advisors out there, some of them pretending to run their own fund that just funneled money to Madoff. One of them was Merkin of the Gabriel Fund. He funneled about $1 billion to Madoff.
Jesus.
And he received annual fees of about $40 million a year. He agreed to pay back $405 million to investors in his funds, but there was no admission of guilt. The complaint against Bernie alleged that he had defrauded his clients of a total of $64 billion. Clients actually had invested probably $19 billion over 20 or 25 years. The difference being the accumulated, supposedly the returns on the investment, which were never earned.
All
Madoff
of this
pled
makes me
guilty.
angry.
Madoff, I'm just thankful I wasn't wrapped up in it. Didn't have any investments there.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of this was going on when I was, trading and running portfolios. And he was quite a name before he was arrested. Obviously Madoff pled guilty, and at his sentencing hearing, the prosecution recommended a 150-year sentence. The Bureau of Prisons 50, and his own attorney recommended 12. The judge sentenced him to 150 years, commenting that he didn't sense Madoff had done all he could or told all that he knew.
I mean, it seems to me that his lifespan is going to be less than 150 years. Well, we already know that that's the case, but
he was 70 or 77 when he was arrested. I forget which one. That 7 number again. But he was actually incarcerated right up the road from us in Butner, near Raleigh. Butner Federal Prison.
Mm-hmm.
Where
my uncle spent some time. It's lovely.
Where he managed to make 24 cents an hour clean the chapel, or sometimes tutoring inmates during his incarceration. First legitimate job he had in a long time.
It's true. I mean, he's got an honest 24 cents.
He earned, apparently, according to reports, he earned a total of $710 from when was he incarcerated? 2010 through 2021 when he died.
It's a lot of hours.
At 24 cents. He contracted renal failure and gangrene. I didn't know that. He lost a couple of toes from gangrene, which is a side effect sometimes of renal failure.
Viking.
Butner couldn't happen to a more deserving guy.
Oh yeah, Butner is a white collar. It is a federal prison. My uncle was an FBI agent. He ended up there. It is not the worst place to be if you are incarcerated. Let's put it that way.
It doesn't have a lot of violent offenders. It's a secure facility. It's old. It's not fancy, as you can tell in the picture. But it's not like Atlanta or some of the other supermax prisons that have a lot of violent offenders. He lost 8 teeth, 2 toes, and died in 2021. He apparently had begun hallucinating as well, and would just go into mad rants at staff and other people. Just got detached from reality. In terms of the recovery for everybody, the recovery funds are still at work, trying to recover assets and funds. The main attorney, Picard, last I saw, he was charging $850 an hour, but has recovered about 88% of all invested funds.
Wow, that's impressive.
So that's about, that's a really high number from what I can tell. They recovered about 18.5 billion of the 19.5 billion invested. So most investors will get their money back.
Impressive.
Now they lost the time value of it, but there's some work that's been done in recovery.
I feel like there's a certain point where it's like, all right, we're just going to take the less of an L on this one and call it a win. Because,
Yeah, I'm not certain what now the funds claim to have recovered or in the process of recovering the 18 billion plus change. But as of the end of 22, they'd only paid out 4 billion. And I couldn't figure out what the discrepancy was or what was the holdup for the rest. So best information I could find is they claim to have recovered it, but just haven't paid it all out yet. Not sure why. But I thought that was interesting. Own $14 billion at 5%. Well, 10% would be 1.4, so half of that would be 700 million a year. It's going somewhere. But that's Bernie Madoff. And, you know, as Ian alluded to earlier, there's some significant parallels to FTX, to long-term capital management in terms of the personalities, the political connection, the kind of the blind eye of regulators to relatively obvious evidence.
These scams just keep being the same scam. That's the really terrifying thing, is it's just the same scam over and over and over again.
Yeah,
you know, because like the Ponzi scheme and the pyramid scheme are basically the classic, you know, the classic scam, and they just keep happening. And you know, it seems like there's got to be some way to, you know, to say like, hey, how do we know you're actually doing the things with the money that you say you're doing? So yeah.
One of the reasons that Clay started this channel was to make people more aware of what could happen if you don't know exactly where your money's going.
There are some really risky moves that people can. I mean, I'm not a big investor, partially because I only understand enough to know that certain things are super dangerous. Like, hey, there's certain investment options that have unlimited liability to them or unlimited potential loss to them, and you know, all of these kinds of things. But you know, these scams come up over and over and over again, and invariably they're pitched as like this. People are going, oh, these are the greatest things ever. The guys who are behind these scams have these times where they're in the sun as like, you know, these heroic figures in investing and so forth. Madoff was, you know, there were celebrities fighting to be on his list of, you know, clients. And I'm going,
yeah, just like SBF.
You know, yep, just like SBF, where there were people like, you know, touting him as great, but
it was the cool thing to do. Everybody wants to be a part of the latest, greatest, cool trend, fashion, whatever. He was big in country clubs. I saw where he spent $1 million on country club fees.
And you've got, you know, and it's always funny because there's the people who are, you know, who are saying like, this is BS. And they're often not listened to, and often, I mean, a lot of these people end up getting reviled and, you know, real criticism for all of that. So,
you know, main idea is there's really nothing new under the sun. You know, we keep seeing the same patterns repeating throughout time. And people just don't want to learn from them. They're too busy getting caught up in the bright, flashy things going on in front of them.
Once they see the money, they're pretty keen on it ending up for them.
It's amazing how blind you can get when money starts rolling in.
Yep.
Yeah, but if there's no risk, it's trash.
Yeah. I mean, the only no risk investments are ones where you're losing money. To wit, things
Exactly.
like I'm burying it in the backyard is a no risk investment, but you will also be
Mhm.
losing money versus inflation. Every second you'll be losing money.
Correct.
So it's like,
And Bernie was doing business with some modestly sophisticated or reasonably intelligent investors. And his fund was earning, let's say 11% per year with a volatility of about 2%, 2.4%. Now, volatility is just a measure of risk. If you look at a stock price, like a stock price, Bernie's fund just went in almost linear fashion. So very little movement in the stock price. But if you look at an actual stock like Apple, $150 a share, during the day, it may go down to 149, it may go up to 151. So the price is moving even as the price trend increases over time. That's volatility. How much does the stock price vibrate? Well, Bernie was doing about 11% return every year with about 2% volatility. The S&P 500 over the same period of time was doing about 9.5% at 18% volatility. So Madoff was claiming to have higher returns than the market with an eighth of the risk. How do you know when you're being defrauded? When risk and return aren't commensurate. Risk and return are always commensurate. Higher returns will have higher risk. Nobody's going to pay you a higher return for a safer investment. It just doesn't happen in this world. If it does, get all you can. It's a fluke. It won't last long.
All right, I gotta let the dogs out, so I'm gonna say goodnight to both of you. Thank you, Ian, so much.
oh, I'm happy to be here. It's there's no need to thank me. It's it's an absolute pleasure. So, yeah, it's this is a fun. I had a lot of fun digging into this one and going like, what's going on with this guy? Because I didn't know half of the, like, you read about stuff on the news, right? But you don't know half of what's going on and what's going down on these things. So it's good to learn these things because there's nothing new under the sun in some ways, and this is really one of those circumstances where it's just like, oh, it's the same old thing, but also it's the same old thing that still keeps happening.
It is, and I know E already thanked you, but we really very much appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, happy to be here. It's
Ellen was telling me earlier you got like 4 hours sleep last night.
Yeah, I did manage to sneak in a little bit of a nap earlier today. So basically, after Lawyers and Dragons, I went and had a nap. Sorry, David. I know he had a stream that I haven't watched yet, but so yeah, it's I'm trying to catch up.
Well, we are very, very appreciative of you taking the time out and joining us tonight. We really enjoyed having you.
Well, thank you very much, and
now
we'll have to make this happen again sometime.
But I'd like that, and I know Ellen certainly would. We also generally, I know you and Rob sometimes have the ability to go into the early hours of the night.
A little bit.
We normally try to keep it around, close up about 9.
Fair enough.
Try to keep it a little bit tighter to the vest, so to speak.
I am not always the best at that, but I will try.
Well, just figured that, tonight would be a good night because you just got off the plane. You've been on, I don't know, 3 or 4 different shows. And I know you.
Yep. So
I wanted to be respectful of your time. Yeah.
Well,
I wanted to be respectful of your time.
And we'll what is it? We'll do this again sometime.
Would like to, very much. And to all of y'all who have joined us tonight, Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming. If you've got additional questions, you can ask them in the comments or DM me on Twitter, Moffat on Money. Be glad to try to answer whatever I can. Thank you for your time. My time is up. I appreciate it. Y'all have a good night. Thanks, Ian.
Right.